This woman was chased through the hotel by people trying to kill her and then left for dead, decomposing in a water tanker. Worst of all, the residents of that hotel continued to drink water that was poisoned with her corpse for the 2 weeks that followed, not knowing that the body of a young girl was decomposing right above their heads. This is the horrifying true story of Elisa Lam. Her parents were originally from Hong Kong, but they'd immigrated to the country before Elisa had even been born in the hopes that she'd have a much better life there. After a lot of hard work, she somehow managed to pass through high school and even got admission to the University of British Columbia. But as her first few years of college went by, she found it harder and harder to do her classes. School was already not manageable for her, and back then she had her parents to help her out with the workload. Now she was all done, with no one to keep her accountable and motivate her to study. Eventually, she decided that it was time to call it quits on her third year, and instead take a vacation to clear her head. She decided to visit California for a couple of weeks, clear her head and get the break she needed. Once she was back in good spirits, she'd get her life back on track. The first place she visited in California was the San Diego Zoo. There she took a lot of pictures and even posted some of them on her social media. Many of her friends would comment on the posts, saying that they miss her and hoping that she enjoys the trip. So far, the trip was going pretty well. She traveled on her own, using Amtrak and intercity buses as her primary mode of transport. On January 26th, she arrived in Los Angeles. A couple of days later, she checked into the Cecil Hotel, which was a decent housing complex in the area and was a pretty cheap option compared to the many other hotels around her. She was first assigned a shared room on the 5th floor, where she had to live with multiple roommates, but pretty quickly, reports started flooding in about her odd behavior. She would talk to people who weren't even there and complain about stuff that didn't even exist. To give you an idea, she might complain about spilled water when, in reality, the floor was completely dry. According to Amy Price, the manager of the Cecil Hotel at the time, Elisa was leaving notes for her roommates that said, "Go home" and "Go away," and would even lock the door to the room and require a password for entry. She was also really noisy, and all in all, it was really tough to live with her. So just 2 days later, she was transferred to a room of her own. From there, it isn't clear what she was up to in the next few days, but it's known for a fact that she attended a live taping of Conan in Burbank, but was soon escorted off the premises by security for disruptive behavior. After that, the trail goes completely cold. She stopped checking into her room, stopped ordering meals, stopped doing just about everything. On January 31st, the day that she was supposed to check out of the hotel and leave for Santa Cruz, her parents didn't hear from her. This was unlike Elisa, and while she might not always be truthful, she would call her parents daily. Fearing that the worst had come to pass, her parents called the police and even flew to the area themselves to help with the search. After a couple of days of scouring the area, they were getting nowhere. Their fears were slowly becoming a reality. So they launched a proper investigation and started collecting every piece of information they could find out about what really happened that day. In their first week of searching, they did find some clues that might help in figuring out Elisa's current location. The first thing they did was pinpoint the last few people to see her alive. Most of the hotel staff didn't remember seeing her, but a couple of people who did said that she was completely alone and didn't really look any different from usual. Outside the hotel, Katie Orphan, who was the manager of a bookstore called The Last Bookstore, was the only person who remembered seeing her that day. Elisa was in the habit of reading, so the two had formed a small acquaintance, and on that particular day, Katie described Elisa as being really outgoing and lively. She was extremely friendly, and the two had a long discussion about what books she could take while she traveled further. But none of that info really gave the police anything that could tell them where Elisa was. This was one of those cases where no one had seen or heard anything, and with the way things were going, the possibilities were endless. Maybe she ran away from home due to all the pressure she was facing. Or maybe she was at the wrong place at the wrong time and was now trapped or captured or worse, dead. the police needed a working theory, something they could show the media and Elisa's parents. So they brought trained dogs in the hopes they'd find something that they'd missed the first time around. They spent a few days searching as much of the hotel as they legally could. Since they didn't have any probable cause that Elisa was still at the hotel, there wasn't a lot they could search. But they did manage to take a look through her room, the public areas of the hotel, and the roof. But nothing came up. And by the time February 6 rolled around, which meant an entire week had passed since her disappearance, and the police had nothing to show for it. They began putting up flyers, hoping that someone would recognize her and maybe give them a clue as to where Elisa Lam was. But just like everything else, even this was a dead end. On February 13th, after another week with no sign of Elisa, the LAPD released a video of the last known sighting of her taken in one of the Cecil's elevators by a video surveillance camera on January 31st. In the 2.5-minute footage, Lam alone makes unusual moves and gestures. She appears to press every button on the elevator panel, peers into the hallway, and then leaves the elevator at one point while its doors remain open. Look, you know what? I think it's best if you take a look at the video yourself to see just how strangely she was acting. This video ended up going viral on the internet as the entire world tried to figure out what happened to this young girl and where she is now. On the Chinese video sharing site Youku, it got 3 million views and more than 10,000 comments within the first 10 days of it being uploaded. By this time, Elisa had been missing from January 31st to around February 19th. During this time, many of the residents had begun complaining about weird, black-colored water. Some residents said that their drinking water tasted funny, and many complained about the water pressure not being high enough. Overall, the Cecil Hotel management was not having a fun time, considering that they already had to deal with the missing girl. All these issues on top of it were just making the problem worse. Eventually, they sent one of their maintenance workers, Santiago Lopez, to check out the water tankers and make sure they were filled properly. When he went to the roof, the first thing he noticed was that one of the water tank lids was completely detached, which meant that it was fully exposed to the surrounding environment. When he investigated it further, he also realized that the water tanker whose lid was detached was the very same water tanker connected to the apartments of the residents who had complained about the water issues. It was an open and shut case. He just needed to go in there, make sure that the water was clean, which it probably was, and his job was done. But when he looked into the tanker, he saw something that would haunt him forever. He saw the dead body of Elisa Lam. Okay, so what happened? How did a young girl go from being a normal college student to ending up dead, her body decomposing in a water tanker? The first thing we need to look at is her autopsy report. Elisa was found completely naked, with her clothes floating in the water beside her. Her body was moderately decomposed and bloated. It was mostly greenish in color by the time the police got her body out of the water tanker. One of the first theories that people had was that the death was a murder. In the elevator footage that I showed earlier, she seemed like she was hiding from someone, which could mean that someone was following her, and when they finally got her, they did horrible things to her and dumped her body in the next best thing, which was the water tanker. Maybe the water would clean away any form of evidence. However, after a thorough examination, no evidence was found of any bodily harm, physical trauma, or sexual assault, which meant that the police scrapped this theory. But if it wasn't a murder, then what was it? Some people suggested suicide, but considering how lively she was with Katie, the manager of the bookstore and the last person to see her alive, as well as the fact that both her parents denied any signs of depression their daughter may have shown in their last few calls, it was unlikely that she took her own life. Yeah, like she did have a lot of pressure on her shoulders, but it wasn't enough to make a case out of. Ultimately, the police needed an answer that would hold up in court. They went back to her parents, asked for her medical history, and it was then that the truth of the situation finally came to life. Elisa, since birth, had bipolar disorder. Early on, they'd noticed her severe mood swings and had taken her to a psychologist for help. There, they found out that Elisa had bipolar disorder, where a person switches between an extremely happy and energetic mood to a depressed mood. These mental challenges were the biggest struggle of Elisa's life, and all her school troubles, all the classes she missed, everything was because of her mental challenges. She owned a blog, and in her blog post, she would frequently talk about her mental illness. In a January 2012 post, she lamented about a relapse that she had at the start of the school year, which caused her to miss a lot of classes. This is what she wrote in her blog post. "I feel I'm wasting my time compared to my fellow peers. I had a relapse at the start of the term and had to drop 2 of the 3 courses I was taking. Now I am down to 1 course and I've missed 3 weeks of classes since my sleeping pattern is completely reversed. I'm a bit defeated, for I have far too much free time and no one to spend time with. I'm checking emails, blog loving, Facebook and Tumblr all of the time, and even jumped into the Twitter foray. I have a short attention span and I'm avoiding writing the 3 papers I owe this course. It's 2 terms. I can text friends who are busy with either school or work, but I have neither of these things going for me. I've started a Photoshop course, but it's only 5 classes, so perhaps I'm learning some sort of useful skill. Other than that, I have very little going on in my life, which is disappointing. I'm very disappointed in myself for breaking down during the term, forcing me to withdraw from courses. I've been at university for 3 years and I've only managed to complete 3 courses. That means I've been a first year for 3 years, and this September it will be for the 4th year because I require 30 credits in order for second year status. I'm trying to stay away from Tumblr and blog loving and get away from all this fashion frivolity that has become the huge distraction from facing some responsibilities. But I feel so utterly directionless and lost. These excuses and past disappointments do more to stop me than anything else. When I cannot fall asleep at night, I'm gripped with the fear that my transcript must be a nightmare. Multiple fails and withdrawals and 3 years with only 3 courses completed cannot look good if I intend to continue on to graduate school. I hate myself for not even being able to attend 1 class, and I feel it's very disrespectful to my professor, who's been so kind and understanding. Instead, I'm left to wander the streets of downtown looking at frivolous things like clothing, but being broke, I cannot buy anything and I feel so empty. What is the purpose of owning a nicely curated closet if there is no place to wear it to? What is the purpose of reading countless articles if there is no one to discuss it with? As much as I do like spending time to myself, when you are alone for so many days, it is not healthy. I know I must start exercising, but excuses. It is a weariness that keeps me at a standstill. From her post, it's clear that she wasn't doing well. She mentioned how she was completely unable to do well in her classes. A couple of months after this, she closed this blog post and started a new one on Tumblr named Nouvelle Nouveau, which had mostly the same stuff as her usual blog post, just on a new platform. While I couldn't access her blog on Tumblr, just the fact that she had one still meant that her hopes of decreasing her Tumblr usage and focusing on studies didn't come to pass. It's like she was trapped. And every time she tried to climb out, life would kick her back into the cage of her mental health issues. By this point, she was also diagnosed with depression in addition to her original bipolar disorder diagnosis. She needed various medicines to regulate her emotions, and some of the medicines she was taking could have taken a toll on her body. But until now, it seemed like things were, not good, but not too bad either. While her family didn't keep all her medical history private, they did say that she had no previous suicide ideation and had never attempted to cut herself or anything of the sort. One report did say that she'd gone missing for a brief period at one point, but overall, she seemed like she wasn't doing too bad. But if you asked Elisa, she was absolutely miserable. And that's why she ended up taking that trip to California. Her parents also told the police that Elisa had a history of not taking her medications on time, or even skipping them for multiple days in a row, which sometimes caused her to hallucinate and even caused her to get hospitalized once. But Elisa promised that this time would be different. She promised her parents that she'd taken all her medicines on time, and so they gave her the thumbs up for it, which is probably something they would regret for the rest of their lives. But coming back to the police investigation, after seeing all the facts and learning about Elisa's illness, the final theory that the police had was printed in the official autopsy report. It was released on February 21st and stated that the cause of death was accidental drowning, with her bipolar disorder playing a major part in the whole ordeal. Police ruled that her erratic behavior on the elevator was caused by a paranoid hallucination, as she had climbed into the tank herself, believing that she was in danger. Police then speculate that perhaps when she entered the tank, the water level was high enough that she could have gotten herself out. But as guests and residents used the tap water, the level could have decreased, leaving her trapped in the tank without a way to get herself out. They also speculate she undressed while in the tank, attempting to remove the clothing weighing her down. Multiple key items like her room keys, her watch, and her clothes were found right beside her in the water tanker, which gives even more credit to this theory. Another thing to consider here is the fact that the lid of the water tanker wasn't put back in place. The police had gone on the roof, they had even used trained dogs to hopefully pick up her scent. If it was a murder, then just leaving the lid as it was would probably be a dumb idea and draw a lot of unnecessary attention. However, despite this case being tied up in a neat bow, there is still a lot of unanswered questions. For example, Elisa should have had her phone with her. Why didn't she call anyone for help if she was trying to escape and had voluntarily taken off her clothes? Also, her phone was never found, so where exactly is it, and what happened to it? Furthermore, a lot of people felt that her being bipolar and imagining the entire thing felt pretty contrived and might have even been a cover-up. How did police and trained dogs miss an entire body just lying a few feet away from them? And why did the hotel take so long to check the water tanker? Looking at the elevator video and the water tanker in which she was found, there are primarily 3 theories that exist, but all of them have their own criticisms. The first, simplest theory is that someone was actually chasing her and she went into the water tanker to hide from that person, but ended up getting trapped and dying. A lot of people would say that the footage we got didn't have any other person except for her, but the issue that some people raise up is that the timestamp is completely obscured. They argue that the video was edited and cut together, with a minute or even more video being cut all together to protect the identity of someone who might have come into frame. If this is the case, then that person could very well be the one behind all this, and the one that Elisa was hiding from. Moreover, one crucial thing that remained unexplained for a long time after her death was how she even got to the roof. Doors and stairs that access the hotel's roof are locked, and only staff are given the keys to unlock them. Later on, multiple people showed that she could have used the fire escape to get to the roof, but would a person who's running for her life really have the time to figure out that she can use the fire escape? Another thing to look at here is that while it was said that there was no evidence of sexual assault, the autopsy report doesn't provide the results of the rape and the fingernail kit, and doesn't even specify if they were used at all. It could be the case that they came up with this cover story to hide the fact that she was raped so they can avoid controversy. While there are a lot of factors that give this theory some weight, the main criticism it faces is the complete lack of evidence that it has. While it's easy to believe that someone was chasing her and that someone ended up killing her, there's very little data to show for it. The second theory says that Elisa was under the influence of drugs when the elevator footage was taken. And to be fair, she does look like she was under the influence. This caused her to hallucinate and led to a breakdown, which eventually led her to put herself in the water tanker. But this one is the weakest of the three theories. The toxicology report came clean, and some of the same points in criticism stand as before. How would she figure out the fire escape route in such a short time? Moreover, if she was under the influence of drugs, she probably wouldn't be able to climb the water tanker and get inside of it. The final theory we have already discussed, and it's the one that the police went ahead with. It has the most proof, with her parents telling the police about her bad habit of not taking her medicine and behaving strangely when she isn't medicating herself. And the toxicology report found few traces of her medicines, which means that she probably was under-medicating in the days before her disappearance. But it still has a lot of incomplete information, like that rape kit that was never officially done. Moreover, some people argue that any trace of her medicine would have broken down by the time the toxicology report was done, which means that there's a good chance she was in good mental health when she disappeared. Some of the doctors who worked on the case themselves had doubts about whether her death was accidental or not. Some people even claimed that all the pressure ended up getting to her and she committed suicide out of her own volition. However, since we have no data to support this theory, there's not much to talk about it. At the end of the day, what happened on January 31st still remains a mystery that may never be solved. After Elisa's death, her Tumblr continued to auto-post for a while, which is suspected to be due to the queue feature that it has when you can schedule posts to go online at a specific time. But her phone was never recovered, which means that this theory can never be verified. In the same year, her parents ended up suing the hotel for wrongful death, but their case was dismissed pretty quickly, considering the ambiguity of her death. Elisa Lam may have left us that day, but since then, both of her blogs have received comments from people all over the world, showing their love and support. Hopefully, she finds peace wherever she is.